Welkom, je luistert naar Business Radio van op FTI SuperNova in de Waagnatie in Antwerpen. Ik ben Tom van der Velp en mijn studiogast vandaag is Yannick Oswald, partner bij toonaangevende Europese en Israëlische durfkapitaalfonds Mangrove Capital Partners, de eerste investeerder in bedrijven als Wix, Skype en vele andere. Hey, welcome Yannick. How are you doing today?
Very, very good.
Yeah?
Wonderful day in Antwerp.
Yeah. How are you enjoying SuperNova this far?
I really liked it. Was an opportunity to see some friends, some great founders. Excellent event.
Well, you know, Yannick, you have a famous blog, yannickoswald.com, and it's called Opportunities Everywhere. Is opportunity really everywhere for venture capitalists?
100% yes. That's why we do what we do. We see thousands of great ideas every year. We only invest in very few ones that we believe can drive returns for our shareholders. But yes, that's what we do and why we exist.
It seems you have a very positive mindset. There is opportunity everywhere, but you need to look for it and you need to know where to look for it. Am I correct?
Yes, I think on the positiveness, in the world of startups, you have to be positive. I think every founder we work with is insanely optimistic, and that's what you have to do. There are so many setbacks along the journey. And me too, I'm positive. And every day I get excited about working with my founders, getting to know new founders. So you need to have that. Otherwise, I'd suggest do something else. We see thousands of new companies every year, and we only pick very few ones that we believe can drive returns for our shareholders. And I'd argue every year we're seeing more opportunities in Europe. So it's really only getting started.
I hear some of the SMEs in Europe complain that it has become harder to secure funding, particularly also on the startup level. Do you agree?
Yes and no. Yes, on the front that the last 2-3 years, that was Fantasyland. There was so much capital in the market. Everybody could raise capital on an idea. I personally, and we as a firm, felt very uncomfortable in this environment because there is no free money. And somebody has to pay for it at one point in time. And many startups, etc., pay the price today with markets turning or getting back to normality, as I call it. But I don't agree that you can't raise capital. Everybody can find capital in Europe. There's a lot of capital and there are a lot of investors from across stages. And I always say you only have to put in the work.
And what would that work be? Because if you say you have to put in the work, I can imagine that most of the founders are doing everything they can. Or they're then overlooking things, or they're using the wrong approach. What would be your advice when you're saying, well, capital is everywhere, just go and find it?
Yeah. So if I be someone who has no network today, who has an idea, I would try to find somewhere in the city I live, someone who has a link to investors. And that sometimes takes a few steps. But to be honest, everybody is willing to help if you have an exciting story to tell them. And so you have to go through that process. And Europe is very fragmented. We have small markets. So no one is very far away.
Interesting and also very inspiring. On your blog, I also read opportunities are everywhere. It's just that most people are too busy focusing on winning by someone else's rules. What do you mean by that?
Yes, it's we look for global players and things that can go global or can go big are usually new novel ideas. If you tell me, and we discussed that before, I'm the Uber of, you kind of position yourself already as the number 2 or 3. It's some space. and nobody wants to back the number 2 or 3. And that's why I always say is like you have to come up with your own idea, get feedback. You have to be willing to make mistakes, and not try to copy something. You can be very successful, but probably the magnitude is not something early stage venture investors like us are looking for.
So just to make this very specific, from your point of view, what would be the key thing that you are looking for when looking for a new venture?
Yes. So from a founder perspective, there are 4 points.
Yeah.
It's number 1, we like to go big markets where we think there will be a pull. What do I mean by that? And I was lucky enough to experience it a couple of times. If you're in a market there's really demand for a certain product that doesn't exist yet, you see people proactively reaching out, buying is selling, it becomes much, much easier. There's this, it's a bit like, a rising tide lifts all boats, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we're looking for, this magic market. The second point is the team. Do they have product excellence? Meaning, can they build a product that is differentiated and truly great? Meaning, and ultimately, what does that mean? Do people like it? The third point is the execution skills. Is this team hungry? Do they really want to go for it? And the last point, it's probably, are they storytellers? Can they raise capital? Can they go out there and get people excited? Employees, PR, the radio here, right? They need to be able to create that excitement. Because I tried it a couple of times, you can't change that really. And ultimately, I'm not with them in the room when they have to raise capital, etc. So they have to pull that off. And so just to finish this off, sometimes we had founders big success stories who were not great storytellers, but they were excellent in product. So they really delivered on performance. And sometimes we have the opposite. And the best is to have a little bit of both, right? You don't want to have stories without any substance, obviously. You need to have a little bit of both. So that's what we kind of try to find, and we help where we can, provide some added value.
Now, just to narrow that down a little bit, if I'm a founder, I'm listening to this cast at the moment, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got a great market approach, I've got a really good product, I probably got an amazing team. I might not be that good of a storyteller. Do you feel that's something they might consider hiring in or bringing in from outside, or is that a hopeless case?
So my conviction is actually everybody can be a good storyteller. It just takes a little bit of work and iterations. Sometimes the time I found is when they go and raise capital, they kind of prepare their story on the train on the way there, and they think that's going to work. I think if I take a call with someone, where I have to present the story, I always write down my key points, the sound bites I need to get across. So every 20-minute interaction requires some preparation if I want to get a story across. And so you just have to put in the work. Some do it naturally better. The others have to work a little bit more on it. But it's just important. To be honest, I always tell founders the following. It's like if you walk into a car shop, many great cars, shiny, beautiful, price is a bit different, etc. Ultimately, what you end up buying is there's so many elements, right? Why you like a specific object. That's how you have to think about when you pitch a startup. There are thousands of companies out there. The good thing is, Europeans, would say, a little bit less good storytellers than, let's say, the Americans, who can sell you everything. As a European founder, you have a little bit less competition, which is a good thing,
I already noticed that you always look at things from the bright side. And I think that's a really amazing way of looking at the world. I'd love to ask you one question about opportunity also involving equality. And, there's still a huge funding gap between mixed gender teams and single gender teams, especially all female teams. Would you go as far as to say, like, well, this is also a hopeless battle, the venture capital ecosystem is non-inclusive?
So I don't agree with that. Obviously, the data is the data, and nobody can argue with that. I'm working with several female founders, if you think about the gender topic. I don't make a difference where you're from, what you did. I really don't care. Now, it's true, you get less pitches from female founders, but also I'd like to take just a step back. There are many minorities, some larger, some smaller, where basically where entrepreneurship is less popular. And for me, the reason is the following: they're just less role models. The probability that you have a friend of a friend who was successful is just lower. And we can talk about geographies, we can talk about, but again, it's honestly, as I mentioned, the world is relatively flat. Everybody can have a shot, wherever you live, whatever your gender, and we see that in our portfolio. We have all types of founders.
So even when you are a minority, there's still hope.
I have several LGBTQ founders, several female founders. I couldn't care less.
Well, let's hope we'll see more female founder teams in the years ahead. And here's a warm shout out to all the ladies out there. If you're onto something, don't hesitate. It's time for a little break now. We gaan er even uit, maar komen zo meteen weer terug met Yannick Oswald. We spreken dan over het Europese investeringsecosysteem en hoe dat relevant kan blijven. Tot zo dadelijk.
Business Radio, live from FTI SuperNova. Life's a venture.
Welkom terug bij Business Radio van op FTI SuperNova in de Waagnatie in Antwerpen. We spreken vandaag met Yannick Oswald, partner bij toonaangevende Europese en Israëlische durfkapitaalfonds Mangrove Capital Partners. Yannick, on your side you talk about insights instead of ideas, which is very relevant, I feel. Am I right saying insights start with the consumer and ideas start indeed in the isolated minds of a founder? And that could be very tricky.
So what we look for is really, every business is consumer driven. There's always someone somewhere who has to use your product and really like using it. And so we try, when we invest, just take a step back, we invest a third of our capital pre-launch, pre-everything, basically on an idea that hopefully is based on some insights. A third post-product launch. We don't care so much about revenues. And then the third, 1/3, the company even does some revenues, etc. Depends on the space. Sometimes revenues are not very relevant in the tech world, but that's another topic. And so when we back founders before they have anything, like really on the idea, I want to understand what is this unique insight that number one, incentivized you to launch this thing, and secondly, that why someone is going to buy this thing, right? Where does this insight come from? And then we get back to the topic we discussed previously on, how big is the market, etc. That's more sometimes subjective question, based on the person. Does he believe in it? Because often those markets don't exist. We backed one company where we automatized the work of general practitioners, GPs, doctors. When we told people in 2016, they said, you're completely nuts. But it's very clear our healthcare system is under pressure. We need to do something. We need to help doctors. They can't continue doing all this work. We don't have enough. And there are more and more patients. People live longer, etc., etc. And so let's use technology. And so basically now we developed an AI that is rolled out in the major hospitals in the US that basically does the work of a GP. and the GB only comes in 5% of the cases where actually his specific knowledge is needed. So that's, for example, if you think about markets and ideas, and there the idea was really, we knew from data that people are willing to use an app to do diagnosis, etc. And we said, we have the technology now, so we have to go for it. It's obviously a large market.
Yeah. So everything indeed starts with the customer or with the consumer.
Yes.
And from there, from those insights, you start, new ventures. Somebody told you you're completely nuts. Do you take that as a compliment?
I wouldn't say it's a compliment, but it makes me laugh, yeah. Usually on the right path. It's a funny thing. It's just, and that's for the founders out there, I think it's important feedback. Most of our great companies have a tough time raising capital in the beginning. A really tough time. And it always makes me laugh because, and then I think that's also what differentiates good versus, let's say, more general investors. They have their conviction and they really want to back and continue backing that founder. Obviously, there's a limit. And so if you can, try to get a good investor on board as early as possible. Because it changes your body language, who you are, and the support you get.
With globalism coming under pressure, as a next question maybe, because it's a very relevant topic today. More and more countries are focusing now on their own national interests. How do you see this impacting venture capital? Is there an impact at all? Does it maybe bring with it its own opportunities? How do you look at this?
Obviously, there's an impact. So number one, any borders is always bad for tech companies. The internet is inherently global. That's what's beautiful about the internet. Out of your living room, you can sell anywhere in the world. So that's not good. The impact on the day-to-day now for founders, I think shouldn't impact them. It shouldn't think about it. The markets are big enough. So that shouldn't be the excuse, 100%. But obviously, we see in the US now the whole discussions about TikTok, etc. We are heading into this direction very clearly. And it will probably impact where we raise capital and so on more than the founder himself on the ground.
But so in general, you're very hopeful about this. You feel that, founders shouldn't worry too much about it.
No, really not.
And when it comes to
when you reach the stage of those global players, the founder is fine.
Well, let's look at it from a European level then.
Yes.
Because also some people say Europe should be concerned. We don't have a big tech sector, for instance. How do you look at that? Is that an issue for Europe?
So I think there are two angles. It's what comes in and what goes out. And what comes in, we see startup creations going up every year. So there I'm quite optimistic, and we're only getting started. Was in Milan 2 weeks ago, and one of our ex-founders now has raised a couple of billions, really successful story. And I told him, hey man, it's time to give back, let's do something. And there weren't many startups, but there's a lot of talent. And so we're only getting started. And the beauty about Europe is it's ever changing. Right? Yesterday it was London, today it's Paris, tomorrow it's another city where there's a emerging tech scene. So that's it's the first point. The second point is around global tech players. So we have some, there is SAP, etc., but they are older, let's say it like that. But there were some phenomenal success stories we were involved with, or we were close with. You have in Europe, you have Spotify, you have in Israel, you have Wix. These are global companies in their local markets. And this is just a matter of time. So now, and you see, and there's data out there, out of those companies, more and more it's a topic of role models are being founded. Now there is less M&A for tech in Europe, and that's a fact. We saw some early signs. There was some German larger German players who started buying tech companies, etc. So we see that trend, but it's obviously not yet the level of the US.
So maybe to wrap this up as a final question, do you feel that Europe should undertake action? Do we need more regulation to stimulate SMEs, or do you feel that things are good as they are and we should just let the markets play?
So regulation is not good. It's never good because sometimes it gives company a short tailwind, but it's always not long term. Now, I think Europe can do a couple of things in terms of when it comes legal implementations, stock options across European countries. If we invest across Europe, most of them is really a nightmare. And a couple of those, I think, and you don't have to look far, you just copy a little bit, or get inspiration for what has been done in other geographies. That needs to be done so that companies can develop in a lean way. So, but as little regulation as possible, because we take the lean aspect away. In terms of capital, I think most countries now feel quite comfortable about the available capital for companies. And they're great public actors as well. I think France, they have the BPI. They provide everything, venture debt, direct. So I think Europe in that front did quite well. And I think most of them did a pretty amazing job. So I'm quite optimistic on that front. I think Europe needs to improve when it comes to everything, the instruments around startups. They're sometimes not available in certain countries. Could be freelancer contracts, all that kind of stuff, right? How a startup works. Sometimes it's difficult.
So that's an area for Europe to improve.
Yes.
But otherwise, I hear you say, let's stay quite far away from regulation because it has the opposite effect. That's sort of in a wrap-up what you're saying, I think.
Yes. Instead of talking about how to regulate AI, I would say, what can we do to actually allow AI companies grow faster? That's how I would think about it. And I think that, and it's happening in some geographies, so it's happening.
And that is exactly also the opportunity mindset I think we all need and also need to hear. Thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me and kind words. Thank you.
Take care.